So if you're building out N8N AI automations and you want to understand webhooks, then this video is your definitive guide. We'll be going over everything from what are webhooks to how do they compare with the API, and then finally, how do you actually implement them inside of your N8N workflows. So buckle up, pull out a pen and paper, and let's get into it. The easiest way to think about what a webhook is that it is essentially an automated message that is sent between different systems. In practice, you might receive a webhook when a payment is completed, when a calendar event has been booked. And when you're using webhooks, you don't have to check over and over again if the status has changed. You'll be notified whenever something happens. And this is a little bit different from APIs. With an API, you're the one asking for data. It starts with your app asking another system for a piece of information, and it's pull-based. You only request the data whenever you need it. With APIs, you control the timing. You might have it run only once per workflow whenever you need the data, or you might run it periodically. With APIs, you can fetch data, you can insert new data, or you can update existing data. Now, when it comes to authentication, APIs and webhooks are a little bit different. With APIs, you authenticate outbound, which means that whenever you are making a request using an API, you are including what's called an API key. You might also use OAuth or other methods for authentication. Now, with webhooks, you authenticate inbound because you're receiving messages from another system. So whenever that happens, you need to verify the sender. The sender may include their own API key or header whenever they're sending a request to you. And the key differences between the two are that APIs are initiated by you, whereas webhooks are initiated by another system. When it comes to timing, you retrieve information from the API whenever you ask for it, whereas you retrieve information from a webhook whenever an event happens. Now, the important thing to understand is that webhooks and APIs are both used for different purposes, and webhooks do not necessarily replace APIs. The reason for this is that oftentimes you'll find that webhooks send a small payload, so they only include part of the information that you need. And a common workflow that you'll find is that a webhook will tell you that an event occurred, and then your system will use the data from that webhook to then call the API to get the full details. The benefits of this approach is that it limits the payload size, so you're not including all the data inside of the webhook, and it also helps you avoid stale data, where you might receive information, but by the time you get to processing it, it has been updated. Now, an important distinction to understand between webhooks and APIs is that the direction does not equal who controls the information. For example, with APIs, you will control when you ask the other system for data, but they control what they're allowed to provide. They also control rate limiting, which is how often you can send requests, and they also control pagination, which is how the data is broken up between multiple requests. When you have a webhook set up, the other system decides when the webhook is sent, but you control what the delivery involves. And an important edge case to look for is that when you're using webhooks, real-time data isn't guaranteed. Because webhooks are near real-time, but they're not completely instant. So depending on different delays, the events can come in out of order. For example, if you have a webhook that responds to whenever an event is rescheduled, there might be two webhooks that are sent. One whenever the previous time was canceled, and one whenever the new time was created. So whenever you design workflows, keep in mind that the order at which you receive the events isn't necessarily the same order at which the events occurred. Another edge case to look out for is that you may receive duplicate events when you have set up a webhook. The reason for this is that the provider which is sending the webhooks may retry if they don't receive a response or if they receive an error from your system. So whenever you design your workflows, plan for duplicates, and you can do this by storing event IDs, and whenever you receive a duplicate event with the same ID, you ignore the repeat. I can think of one example where this happens. So if you're using Slack to send webhooks to your N8N instance, if Slack does not receive a response in time, they will send the same event again. So if you don't have this controlled for, you can receive the same message multiple times. So now that you understand webhooks, let's go into N8N and show you exactly how it works. So we're here in a new workflow inside of N8N. The way that you can set it up to receive webhooks as an input is to add a new node and then choose the webhook trigger. Whenever you're building out your workflow, you can use this test URL, and whenever it goes live, you'll use this one. For the HTTP method, you want to set this to post. This method is used whenever data is sent to your system for the goal of performing an action, and a response isn't necessarily required. For most N8N automations, you will end up using a post request. However, if you wanted to set up a workflow where another system can pull data from your N8N workflow, then you would set this to get. Now we're going to actually send data to this workflow. So I'm going to copy this production URL, close out of this, and then make sure that my webhook workflow is activated. That way the webhook will work. Next, we're going to actually test out the workflow by using an extension called RESTman. RESTman is a Chrome extension that lets you test out different requests to your webhooks. So we're going to add this to our browser, add the extension, and then once you open it up, you will see a dashboard just like this. Change the method to post, put the URL here, and then inside of the body, we can type in any of our request data. This is in JSON format. So you'll send a request body by opening with a curly bracket, you'll add a closing curly bracket, and then any fields you want to add are formatted like this. If you want to add more values to the JSON object, add a comma, and you can add another field. Make sure whenever you send a JSON body that there are no trailing commas. So this line right here does not have a comma, whereas this one does. If I wanted to get rid of this value, I would close out of this, and I would delete this comma here. Once you have the data that you want to send, click this button. Now we can go back to our workflow, go to executions, and we can see that a new execution has been created. Click on copy to editor, and we can see that this node has now been executed. And if we open that up, we can see that the data has been included. So we have the body right here. Now something you might notice is that this is actually a string because we have the text here. In order for N8N to parse this as a JSON object, we're going to go back to RESTman, and here in headers, we're going to add a new header. For the header name, we'll do content-type, and then for the value, we'll do application/JSON. When you include this header, N8N will parse it as a JSON object. So we'll go back to executions, copy this one to our editor, and then click unpin. Now we should see that the body includes two separate fields called name and message. Now you are all set to begin accepting webhooks inside of your N8N workflow. If you found this video helpful, please do leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I make more videos just like this. And with that being said, I'll see you in the next one.